Well, welcome everybody, and thank you for being here. This is Practical Pedagogy, Brain-Based Strategies for Immediate Classroom Implementation. This is our final deep dive session after 4 mini sessions, and we appreciate you being here. The Nice Longer Learning's Remote Learning Series has provided educators opportunities to extend and refine their practices, engaging students in remote and/or online learning. Here, we showcase high-impact practices, model some strategies, share some resources, and highlight ways to facilitate effective remote learning. Although you will also see that most of this is applicable to the in-person classroom also. So we appreciate you being here today. My name is Tracy Ballou, and Candace Herman is co-presenting with me. So just as a reminder, we've all been through Zooms by now, but just as a reminder, you can move the little feature boxes around. Please keep your microphone muted unless you want to respond or ask a question. And you can also put a response in the chat box. So again, this is Candace and we are happy to have you. And thank you so much for being here as we kind of explore some brain science behind some of the strategies we are talking about. So one way to access the materials is the website through which you got here today. So you can go to the Rural Life website, and there you can access our materials under the day located, and she's given you a picture there of what it'll look like, view materials. Or you can just use your phone and use the QR code right now and have a separate tab open with our materials ready for access that way. So today we are going to be going through, like I said, some of the brain science behind our strategy. So our goals for this session are to review the brain science supporting 4 highly effective classroom strategies applicable to both in-person and online learning, and then to explore and identify specific strategies to implement into a sample lesson and then into your own later. So what we mean by brain-based is brain-based strategies. Brain-based learning refers to the teaching methods, lessons, and school programs that are based on latest scientific research about how the brain learns, including factors such as cognitive development, how students learn differently as they age, grow, mature, both cognitively and emotionally. So our 4 sessions included, our 4 mini sessions included chunking, visuals, collaboration, and movement, all of which we will be discussing again today and then utilizing that information into a lesson plan that we have provided for you, and in the hopes that you can then take that tomorrow and the next and so on and start incorporating some of these strategies into your own lesson plans. So if we would just take a couple minutes with us. There are some things that as educators we have heard, talked about, even just as people hearing the news, you know, that we think we know. So if we can just take 2 minutes to kind of unlearn some of those neuro myths that we have believed all this time about the brain and its processing. And we'll recap in just a minute. So surely several of you have heard some of those items before. In fact, all were very familiar to me. The classical music, I mean, they've even made little kiddo shows about this kind of thing, that we only use 10% of our brains. That's a common misnomer. The subliminal messages, and we noticed earlier that when we went through this, that commercial said it doesn't work, but they still used it. I thought it was cute. That we only use 1/2 of our brain, right or left. That's not true. You're not predominantly left or right. We use both. Maybe both just aren't highlighted at the same time. And the bigger the brain, the smarter you are. That kind of gives a throwback to that children's show, Jimmy Neutron, that he had this very big brain and he was super smart. But again, that's not true. And the last 2, although we did not watch those, the last 2 are not as specific to education, but just in general. They regarded brain cell death and what kills brain cells and what does not, and then brain damage, permanence, and the ability of our brain to regrow new synapses and connectors. So what we want to do is just kind of reflect a little bit about what we need to unlearn. What do we need to unlearn as it relates to how our brain works? How is our instruction influenced by our assumptions about how the brain works? And then how can learning what research actually tells us about the brain inform our teaching? So if we can just unmute and or put in the chat box some of your thoughts, that's why Candace has put this little think time icon here. We're just going to take a moment and reflect on some of the things we need to unlearn and how this affects our classroom.
Tracy,
Yes.
one thing that you and I were talking about earlier when we had bumped down to maybe how's our instruction influenced about our assumptions about how the brain works. Later in this, we indicated in our goals that we'll be taking a look at a sample lesson plan with the intention of teachers having the opportunity to think about those strategies within that plan, but really within their own lessons. So as we're thinking about the way that we design our lessons, whether it's from a curriculum that's been adopted, or if we have some hybrid version of that where we're still including designs and lessons that we've included. One thing that I've noticed as I talk with teachers, Tracy, and I think you had mentioned this as well, is that sometimes we get kind of stuck in my kids can't do that, and it's not, we don't want to, certainly don't want to be dismissive of that struggle, but sometimes that has to do a lot with our mindsets and with our understanding of how the brain works. Like, you're good at math, you've always been good at math, but you're not really a strong writer. Well, maybe right now, but when we think about how this is influenced as well by growth mindset and what we know to be true about how the brain works, so that might be a way that our instruction could be influenced by what we know about how the brain works. That's kind of how I was taking this in any case. I'm not sure if anybody else had a different perception of that.
Absolutely. I love that you mentioned Dweck's work about our brain and how it can relearn things and grow. But I thought of this as sometimes as a teacher, you think these are my auditory learners, these are my visual learners, and these are my tactile learners. And although that may be a preference, that is not a limiting thing. And it's not to say that you shouldn't expose them to all types of learning, or even better yet, integrate all types of learning. So that's something Candace and I will kind of get to later in the program. But these are just some things that we wanted to reflect on, some ways that we can reflect in our own classroom and say, hey, here's what I probably need to include. Here's probably what I don't need to include. So let's just kind of keep those questions at the forefront of our mind as we go on with today's session. And Candace, I'll hand it over to you for our first strategy.
Okay, I just want to mention what Brandy had said here too. She had dropped this in the comments for us, that she was talking about the myth of the left brain and the right brain. And like, I'm telling you, I've heard that like up until adulthood. And you think that really is, I mean, it sounds kind of silly, but when you hear something so much, you kind of take it for granted that is a truth. And Tracy, I really appreciate what you were saying about styles versus preferences. Back in the day when we were designing lesson plans, that might have been even something we put in that little differentiation section. And so I think that's really important that you had mentioned that, so that styles are maybe not necessarily the same thing as preferences. And you're right, we'll go ahead and take a closer look at some of these as we're just reviewing. We'll start with chunking first. So as we do begin our review of these 4 brain-based strategies we'll highlight throughout this series, we're going to start with chunking, which quite simply refers to segmenting learning for recall and retention, and of course further deepening that learning. So the next 2 slides are going to address 2 types of chunking that Tracy and I chose to highlight throughout this series. So first we'll think of chunking by information. We're noting that we can hold more information as our brains develop with age. So little people can retain a couple of things, middle schoolers a few more, and then ideally, as we age, we can figure out how to balance that and how to kind of navigate that as we get more information all at once. So in particular, students and teachers are experiencing information overload right now as we process not only new content, like with our new curriculum, a lot of new right now, but also with new platforms. When we think about multiple modes of delivery, we're now considering remote versus in-person, synchronous versus asynchronous, terms maybe that we haven't really worked a lot with in the past. And so there's a lot of new right now, a lot of new information. And so we think about that phrase, a sponge can only absorb so much. Something's got to go, as this last bullet point indicates. So we want to remember that whenever we are designing our lessons for kids, when we are enrolling that instruction for them as well. So in addition to limited space for information processing, we can also experience limited focus based on time to a devoted task. And this is particularly true of passive learning, which is why we want to strive for a variety in both time and modality. We want to kind of switch it up so that we don't have, we're not too heavy-handed on the direct instruction. Like certainly we want explicit instruction at times, but we also want to have that shift so that kids aren't getting too stagnant, and maybe even increase our motivation as we go. So we'll take a quick look at this graph. There is a bit of information on it. I know that you'll need a minute or two to just kind of let your eyeball circulate around it. As we're looking at this, we're thinking about these benefits to chunking in an online format. And again, that can be even like with a flipped classroom, blended learning. We really just want to ask ourselves what this means for our classroom and maybe with the different teachers that we work with. So as we, again, kind of roll around and we start with 1, we'll notice that 1, 2, and 5 are addressing time and modality, which is what we just covered. So we want to chunk according to different time. And also we're kind of switching up our mode of delivery. 3 and 4 are reminding us of the importance of chunking as it relates to prioritizing information. And then again, retrieving that information. So it lets us know what's the most important for right now, for this task that's in front of me. Okay, I can put that to the side, and now I can move on to the next. And then finally we get to 6, and truthfully, Tracy and I, when we looked at this, we were like, ooh, that needed to be chunked. That's pretty wordy little blurb there. So when we look at this one, in 6, we're talking about the limited screen space and how that can impact student learning when you have a lot of stuff. So think about if you've tried to attend a webinar, pull up a Google slide, an email, whatever it is that you're trying to pull up on your device, the difference that it might have when you're looking at it on your laptop screen versus like that tiny little phone that well, I don't know if it's tiny, but it's certainly smaller than a computer screen. And just for quick reference for those of us that are here or might view this later, just remember to check out that Rural Life site. We've got an excellent recording of Kristen Zinke, and she talks to us again about Rig to the World, and she talks specifically about that issue that's addressed within 6. So just once again, we're looking at chunking as it benefits us in time and modality, prioritizing and retaining information and retrieving, and also just accessing that information in the first place. So we're just kind of anchoring our learning and our thought in this. So we're thinking so as not to overwhelm our learners, we're asking about how do you envision your classroom being rolled out, the teachers that we work with, how can these 6 benefits, how can you get the most impact out of this? And so while the chunking strategy provides the opportunity for pacing and retention, visuals further stimulate the brain with those visual cues. Excuse me. So as we skim through this information on this slide, you might consider the last thing that you learned. What senses were activated in that learning? What was the role of sight or visuals in supporting your learning? And how can we incorporate those visuals into our classes, either virtual or in person, to support learning? So again, we're thinking about the last thing that you learned, how those senses were activated, and in particular, how the sense of sight might have had an impact. Tracy, I don't mean to put you on the spot, but I think maybe when you and I were looking at this earlier, I think maybe you had an example for us. Is that right? the last thing that you learned? I feel like the last thing I learned, like I was staring at a screen the entire time. I think you had maybe had something a little
We
more
have,
hands-on for us.
yes, yes, we have. It was actually in one of our summer learning series. And I remembered specifically, I remember even showing my children that, and this kind of gives a little foreshadowing for what we're going to talk about later. But we had an image of the brain before physical activity, and it showed some spots lighting up, and the most was just kind of dull. And then it had the brain after 20 minutes of physical activity, and they were yellow and orange all over the place, all over the brain. So that was a visual that stuck with me, and one that I felt, they say a picture speaks 1,000 words. It doesn't even have to be a picture, but it is true because that is what stuck with me the most out of that learning series.
Thanks, Tracy. I don't want to hurry anybody along, but if anybody wants to chime in on this, if you're like super proud of something that you've learned recently and you want to share out, I'll give you just like a minute to decide if you want to, either in chat or to unmute, and then we'll move on if you guys would like. So I'll give you like a minute to decide if you want to share out anything.
This is kind of indirect, but I've been taking a course that's Google sponsors on some of their Google training. And one thing I found interesting was this: they show a video. Below it, they have a transcript from the video. But as the person's talking, it highlights the different sections in the transcript that they're saying. So like you can scroll down and the video will appear in the lower right-hand corner, and you can actually read the text as you hear the person talk at the same time, which for me I found was really helpful and reinforcing because you got to hear it and see it at the same time, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. And that's the perfect segue to what Candace is going into next. And that how helpful for our students would that be? That's a great example.
Thanks, John. You set us up nicely there. Thank you.
That's right.
So we're going to take a look at this short video on dual coding. And that just has to do, again, with what we were talking about earlier when we partner text with visuals and how that really helps to solidify the learning. So we're going to be thinking about the importance of connections between text and images. And as we view this, we don't need to take notes or anything. We're just thinking about ways that we can use dual coding to support our student learning. So we're just thinking about how we can use partnering text with image to support student learning. All right, so as we think about some of the takeaways that we may have had as we viewed that short video, we're thinking about text coding, and maybe we've even heard of that phrase, sketching through the text. So we can annotate not only with words, marginally, either digitally or paper pencil, but we can also annotate with our images, with pictographs, with any kind of visuals like that. So we're really remembering that words plus images equals connection. So we want to make those personal connections, because connections, like, it's not just about like SEL and being touchy-feely. Like, this really is grounded in brain science. Those connections boost memory, but it also boosts the connections between concepts as well. So we're not just encouraging kids or supporting kids in memorizing facts, dates, vocabulary terms. We're also helping them forge those connections so that they are making they're seeing and maybe even developing those relationships between concepts. So later we'll take a look at a really simple sample lesson plan, but within it, it's talking about ecosystems and habitats. So if we're thinking about that as our example, we consider the ecosystems, for instance. Of course, you can't neglect this, that there's a relationship among the organisms and the habitats. Okay, so when we're using dual coding, we are supporting kids in retaining that vocabulary, but also building upon that concept of interrelatedness, which is something that's going to spill over into their social studies class, their science class, and so on, as they think about the impact of those relationships on, like, the human impact on geography, on resources, on population, and even the global economies, which is such a timely topic right now. And so once again, just to kind of condense that, we're thinking of dual coding as it supports learning and retaining not only those details of like the facts, the vocabulary, and so on, but also opening that learning so that we can encompass the conceptual learning as well. So again, to recap, we're thinking again about, I think what Tracy had mentioned before, that image of how the brain is activated at different times when it receives different stimulus. So using those PET scans, medical researchers have actually been able to demonstrate that different areas of the brain do become active when individuals are exposed to verbal and visual information. So when individuals are asked to look at and remember verbal information, two regions in the brain's verbal domain, the left hemisphere became active. And then when presented with visual information, the right hemisphere lit up. So we're really piggybacking on this idea that pictures plus text is going to give you a broader and deeper understanding. So we do in fact use all of our brains, just not necessarily at the same time. And so using visuals to support learning, it helps activate those parts of the brain that do solidify learning.
So we had a couple comments in the chat, and that's so true. We don't have a little like button or a little thumbs up button to give our chat responses, but so Brandy says the immediate thought was how beneficial our scaffolds and supports that we offer to students with either IEPs, 504s, or our EL students are beneficial to everyone. Those same tools are beneficial to everyone. And yes, Brandy, we talked about that in our visual session about how applicable this is in an EL setting or even foreign language setting. So that is something that or even kindergarten, kindergarten classes are so visually rich. And then Bethany says she sees dual coding on a continuum of complexity, single words, single images, all the way up to synthesizing more complex charts and graphs. And that's absolutely, when we say picture, we don't mean to imply just a photograph. We absolutely mean to broaden it to any sort of visual representation that can speak to, as Candace said, kind of both sides of our brain, and it just makes retention better for our students. So now we're going to go on to our next one, and our next two are probably buzzwords that you have heard, especially now that we're doing virtual learning, a lot of us. However, putting them into virtual practice hasn't always been something that we had to think about as teachers. So our next one is collaboration, and collaboration has different connotations for different people. So some people think collaboration and they kind of cringe because they think of committees, and then other people hear collaboration and they smile because they think, hey, interacting, relationship building. Well, what we're gonna talk about in the next couple slides is that it actually improves our students' learning. So collaborative learning activities are actually more brain efficient, and they're more likely to be remembered by our students. And then following up on that, our next slide, they not only make students feel good, they improve their interpersonal skills. They improve their self-esteem. So their interpersonal skills, very important in the digital age when everybody's kind of isolated. So secondly, their self-esteem, it makes them feel capable. Their accountability keeps them engaged, not only with their teacher, but also with their peers. And it increases their retention. And isn't that the point of teaching? Is to increase their retention. Hopefully they hold on to most of what we have taught them. And then it prepares them for higher order thinking skills, which is what they will need to be college and career ready, which again, isn't that the point of education? So our following slide is just going to show you a few examples, well, several examples that Candace and I have come across in building these mini sessions. And on one column you have blue, and those are all hyperlinked for you. If you go to the materials page again, like we said before, these will also be listed in the bibliography. So you could click on those hyperlinks. Those are just some of the protocols and activities that either we used in our sessions or that we found foster collaboration among students. On the other side, you have white words, and those are just almost everyday words now in this virtual world, Padlet, Google Slides, and so on. So those are what we consider to be high-level collaborative activities that you can easily implement with your students tomorrow. They don't take a lot of tutorial type learning. So these will be easily implementable into your lesson plan, even if you wanted to do it tomorrow. In fact, one of our collaborative exercises was Padlet. And I had been on a Padlet before, but I had never created one myself, although I did it that day in 5 minutes. It was very user-friendly. So I was appreciative of that. Several different links available in the bibliography, and we'll talk about that later. But again, you can reference this in the materials page if you're just needing some, hey, I need a quick activity to do this. I need a quick activity to do this. And it makes your students feel like you're interacting more with them, which allows them to be more engaged with what you're trying to teach them anyway. And then moving on to our final strategy, last but definitely not least, this is something that we all probably feel as we sit in front of our computers day after day doing Zooms and virtual meetings and emails. But our last strategy is movement. And again, it's not just a feel good, although movement does make us feel good. Like Candace compared it before to exercise, although exercise, you don't always want to begin doing it. You always feel better after you have done it. She's mentioned that about she was making a comparison about something, but it's so true. I don't want to get up in the morning and go get on the treadmill. But if I do, I feel better. My brain is more alert and so on. So some of the science-backed strategies to improve instruction include movement. And again, aren't we after the point of improving our instruction? So evidence of links between our body and our minds include various benefits, but we've broken them down here to 5 things. So we have anatomical evidence. The part of the brain that processes movement is the same part of the brain that processes learning. Evidence from imaging techniques. There's a strong relationship between motor and cognitive processes. There's cognitive evidence, which signifies significant gains in attention and reading from stimulating playground activities. It may seem counterintuitive, but taking the kids out on the playground for 5 minutes before you come and read Johnny something or other. I don't know what a primary grade. I was trying to think of a primary grade. C-spot run. There you go. You know, before you come in and do C-spot run, actually is not going to, it's actually going to create their mind. It's going to give their mind that energy that before they were just trying to get the wiggles out of their bodies. Now their mind is more alert, and so they're going to understand better about C-spot run. Functional evidence, exercise fuels the brain with oxygen, which is essential for brain function. And then school application, increased cognition, better memory, reduces likelihood of depression. And this has always been important, but even more so now when students and teachers are isolated. So just to kind of recap, several of these categories referenced how our brain has the ability to grow new synapses, new connectors, and literally grow new brain cells after some sort of physical activity. So instead, I don't know about you all, but I have a hard time sitting through those 8-hour in-services. And I'm the one who might go to the back of the room and kind of stand and sway a little bit just to kind of get off my bottom and onto my feet a little bit. But physical activity helps our brains stay more alert, and we are better able to retain the information. And as Candace mentioned earlier, it goes back to that neuroplasticity and Carol Dweck's studies. So if you're interested in that, that's just a sidebar. But as far as our effect in the classroom, here we go. Research confirms physical activity improves mental clarity and attention span, academic performance, behavior. Here was the kicker. This is what got us the first time through. It improves behavior, especially in those students who struggle with behavior. It improves test scores, and it improves our emotional well-being. So it's a whole child approach, another buzzword there for you. Physical exercise provides an unparalleled stimulus, creating an environment in which the brain is ready, willing, and able to learn. So if we could now we're going to take 1 minute. You can turn off your camera if you want to, but we don't mind. We're just going to do a stand and stretch 1 minute break. You can grab a cup of coffee, you can grab a bottle of water, you can do whatever you need to do. But just so we're not sitting for 60 minutes straight, we're going to stand up and stretch. Okay, hopefully everybody got their blood flowing again. And that helps me. So Candace is going to take us on to start our review of these and then our application, but we wanted to give you a little bit of a brain break before we did that.
Thank you, Tracy. That was like the quickest minute of my entire life, but like I still appreciated it. So thanks for throwing that in there. Before I move on to going through these goals, reviewing them one more time, I just wanted to call out some of the comments that we had. Bethany had mentioned connecting content to movement that represents that content and learning. And Bethany, I think I know what you mean, like that the movements are specific. It's not just like a random arbitrary movement. It's something specific. Is that what you had in mind?
It is for sure. And I can remember doing that in the classroom. And if kids were in a place where they needed to use that information or that learning, whether it's on a test or for something else, I could see them over there doing it, you know, like whatever the movements were, to try to remember. It was a way for them to retain that learning.
Thank you. And then Brandy, if you don't mind, I know I see you've got some movement happening behind you. I've like parked mine in a nap right now that I will pay for later, but it needed to happen. Brandy, if you don't mind, can you unmute and maybe talk to us a little bit about the Tennessee vocabulary and how you use movement to kind of support that?
Sure. When I was in the classroom and Tennessee academic vocabulary was a big thing that they pushed, and especially in social studies, because I felt like when I was self-contained, I didn't have a ton of time to put forth in every subject. And so I thought, what's the biggest thing? So if I didn't have a ton of time for social studies, perhaps, I would always go over the Tennessee academic vocabulary for that. And by the end of the year, the entire list, students had movements for every word and every definition. And so I just said, I want that dual coding, them to be able to use both sides of their brain to ensure that they're going to remember it. And to piggyback on something that Tracy had shared, I am a firm believer in not taking outside time as punishment. And I know that's not our platform here, but just wanted to share that because knowing how beneficial that is to those kids, and the kids I felt like we were taking it from were the kids that were so desperate to have it and needed it. So yes. I love that you all added that. Thank you.
The behavior point, is that the one you're talking about? The students who struggle with behavior? Yes.
Yes.
I think it's important even now that some of us are in hybrid settings, and several of the schools I visit now do this. Even teenagers, and whatever it is, we all need to just move and get a little bit of sunshine sometimes, you know? So if it's a 5-minute after lunch walk, whatever it is, you're going to get more out of them. Your class is going to reap the benefits of that productivity. Even if it's physical productivity, your class is going to reap the benefits. So yes, thank you all. That was good input.
I think that's related. I think that's definitely connected, Brandy. You know, this session itself in the whole is not really about SEL, but we will touch on it a little bit later. And I think that plays into a part of it. It makes me think of like whenever we would assign like a penalty, like a writing penalty, like, wow, you're really going to inspire like a love of, like, no, not really. And so it's easy to get caught up in reactions like that. So we want to try to remember that we want to do what's effective and purposeful, not just you know, what's I've done it. I will just throw that out there, like I've done it. Like this is not, like I do not have like a perfect track record on that. And so I think that really kind of to revisit like what Tracy had shared with us earlier about like unlearning what we think we know about neuromyths. So no, I think that's an excellent point that you brought up, about, you know, not necessarily using that to punish the kids or ourselves, because it's a punishment to ourselves a lot of times. Let's just be real about that.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Much attention. Yes. So we'll round this out by reviewing these goals that we had set prior to getting started. So within this series, we've thought about these brain-based strategies of chunking, visuals, collaboration, and again, movement, which we just mentioned a moment ago. And so we just want to remind anyone that's here with us today, or anyone that will see this particular recording, that if you want to revisit any of these or any of these other sessions, that you can do that with the same link that you used to find this particular session. But for now, however, we'll just consider today's review of these strategies and how to identify them within a lesson, and then how to further integrate them. So Tracy, if you don't mind, I'll let her drop the link to these resources. It, of course, is on that site again, but just for quick reference, she's going to share this with us, and you'll be prompted to make a copy. For those that end up seeing this as a recording, this will be available as well within that folder, and the links will be accessible. Excuse me. So on this slide, we're going to have the opportunity to explore these brain-based strategies. We're going to select, each of us will select a link from each color that represents one of those categories. So one link from each row, one link for each color. We'll give ourselves 10 minutes of independent research time. And the knowledge that you'll build from these selected resources is going to help inform your approach to the sample lesson that follows. So I'll reiterate that once more. So we've got this list of choices here with all of these links. There's a lot of information on here. Certainly you can review this later if you'd like. For right now, we just want to like ground what we're going to do in our next activity in some research. So we're just asking you to choose one link for each color, whichever one or ones appeal to you. And then we'll come back together after 10 minutes and we'll start kind of piecing together this lesson plan. Are there any questions about what your instructions actually are right now?
And if you need fewer than 10 minutes, you may not need the entire 10 minutes. So if you need fewer than that, just give me a thumbs up and we can move forward. We are familiar with these resources, so we've set 10 minutes, but it may not take you that long. So just give me a thumbs up and we'll move on then, okay?
Okay, thank you, Tracy. I'll go ahead and start our timer if there are any questions. If you do have questions, of course, as we go, you feel free to visit us in chat and we'll respond.
Just checking in, everybody, and no rush. About 4 minutes left, unless you're ready to move on. Again, no, not rushing you. Just kind of give me a state of the union, if you will.
I think we might be ready to resume unless anybody wants any more time. Are there any participants that would like an extra minute or so? Okay, well, we'll go ahead and pick up where we left off then. Hopefully you guys found some goodies to get a little bit of a quick review, quick research. Again, if you want to take a closer look, all this information in more detail is available to you on our website itself. So we're going to take a look at this really interesting lesson plan that we have here. And again, this is not a model. This isn't like, this is the perfect, like, absolutely not. This is just really simple and really generic. So just take a minute or so and let your eyeball roll across this. And all we're really going to be doing is we're going to note where this teacher, or if this teacher has used any of these brain-based strategies of chunking, visuals, collaboration, and movement. And our next slide is going to have this listed for us so we don't have to like hold that in our memory as we work forward. So we're just kind of skimming through here to see what this teacher is planning. If there's any brain-based strategies in there. And maybe if you see any opportunity for any more. I'm going to go ahead and move to the next slide, which actually has this on here as well. It's just a little condensed for us, just so that we can see those questions again so we don't have to hold it in our memory. So if I'm talking over you reading through this, you feel free to continue skimming through that if you need to. But once again, what we're doing with this is we're asking ourselves, where do we see brain-based strategies? And here they are once again for us. How could we modify this if we were this teacher, if this teacher were on our team, if this teacher were a teacher that like works within our building, like how could we support this teacher? What do we see that he or she's doing well? How can we build on that? And how can we move to incorporate more of these strategies, which again, we talked about not just being like frou-frou, but actually being brain-based strategies that are going to impact learning. And so there might be something else that you're seeing through here in addition to those brain-based strategies that you're like, also he or she might consider. And so you can use this time for think time. You can unmute, you can drop something in chat, and you can respond to, you probably don't want to have time or want to do all of those, but you can respond to any of those that you would choose, again, in chat or unmute. We'll give you a minute or so to decide upon that. So Brandy has suggested, Brandy, is this in response to this slide that we're looking at? Okay, thank you. So yeah, 2 for vocabulary. Yeah, definitely add movement. I'm like you, like I look at vocabulary and I feel like, well, we could probably do like every one of these in here if we really wanted to.
I was wondering about the 30 minutes of literature where we read chapters 1 and 2, we read the assigned article, if there are ways to I'm just wondering what that 30 minutes could look like, whether it's chunked, whether we could include some visuals that represent the text, or have kids in collaboration talking about little bits of the text across that 30 minutes, or how we can get kids maybe moving in some way, stations to examine different parts of the text. Just something that would be more than just, hey, let's read for the next 30 minutes.
Literally anything. Yeah.
Right.
And I
And
see
it's
Brandy, she's echoed that as well. Like maybe reading with a partner for collaboration. Tracy and I, we had said that that's a lot of it. Like for an adult, like I enjoy reading. I enjoy being left the heck alone to read, but that's a lot of time for a middle schooler to sit and stare at a screen or to stare at text. So yeah, that probably, yeah. One, on vocabulary and grammar, that might be the most obvious way to incorporate some of the strategies. But 3 might be the most needed area to incorporate some of those brain-based strategies.
I was also wondering in the quick write, so it's like, what do you notice with the rambling autobiography mentor text? I wonder, I was looking at, when we did the research a minute ago, I saw that see, think, wonder strategy, and maybe there would be a visual that might go along with the topic or something that could kind of be a little piece of this 15 minutes that just gets their mind thinking about either that time period or the topic or something that could then connect to something they're asked to do the quick route around.
So it's clear we've spent a lot of time together, because literally that's what Tracy and I were saying. We're like, couldn't we? And if we? And yeah, I really like what you said too, Bethany, about if it could connect to that in some way, because I know, and John had mentioned, well, there's some obvious chunking going on in here with the time, but still, if we could try to smooth out those transitions, like it makes the class period go by quickly. And when kids are leaving, they're like, are we done? Is that it? Like even for an online platform. So yeah, there's a lot of opportunity within this. I don't want to hustle anybody through, but was there anything that anybody's just like dying to share? Like, oh, and also I would share this with the teacher. I would suggest this.
Ooh, I love
Brandy
what
just-
Brandy just put in.
Yes, yes.
For the quick write, I thought it would be really awesome. Like the first thing that came to mind was students to be able to get up and move and kind of walk the room and see different pieces, but we could do this by a slide and students could respond. Sorry for the background noise. Even the Jamboard or just on Google Slides or anything like that to get the collaboration, and like obviously if we're in the room for them to move around. But that was my thought for the quick write.
Thank you. These are all great suggestions, and truthfully, if we had like more time, I'm sure we could like just dig around and prowl into this lesson plan and just make it something glorious. So take that same inspiration, like if there was something that you didn't get to share out today, and just remember that as you work on lesson plans or you work with teachers with plans and instruction as we continue to move on through here. It's fine, Brandy, you're about to hear my cutie here in just a minute. I hear her, Mama.
Aww.
So we'll keep on going. And Tracy, with that, I'm going to let you go ahead and take care of the last portion for us, if you don't mind.
Okay. Well, the point of that sample lesson plan was just to let us know that this is not an insurmountable task to add these little brain-based strategies in our everyday lessons. Now, am I going to go so far as to say incorporating all of them in every lesson is easy? It's not. However, anything that we can do to either get our students moving, get our students seeing something, get our students doing something together collaboratively, not cooperating necessarily and not being a committee, but collaborating and making new work together. Anything that we can do of this sort is not only going to improve their learning, but it's going to improve the atmosphere of your classroom, whether the classroom is in person or whether the classroom is virtual. So with all of that in mind, this is just a little time to reflect on what we've learned, because we know that reflection helps solidify our learning. So we're going to do a 3-2-1 reflection, and you only have to choose one. So choose one and either respond in the chat or unmute and respond on the mic. 3 things you learned today, 2 questions you may still have, or 1 thing you can try tomorrow you feel good about. So my example would be, I feel like I could implement a movement brain break immediately. I feel like that would be an easy way to get students up and moving and away from the blue screen and just revitalize their minds so that they're more receptive, like the sponge that Candace mentioned earlier. And then Bethany says 3 strategies from the choice board. So good, good. Candace says she will try. Oh, they're coming in fast now. The next time she sees teachers to use a collaboration tool so they can be inspired and encouraged to use those effective strategies. John says the important relationship of movement to learning. So that's one of the things he learned. Awesome. Pictures and text increased recall. And Brandy says, the myths, the debunking the myths, but it is something she has to continually remind herself of how beneficial movement is and the research to back it up. And she likes the different takes on the choice board also, because not everything is for everybody. So we all we all can apply different things in our classroom. So again, this brings us to the end of our session. We appreciate you all being here with us, but we also want to give you links to the bibliography, and some of the previous sessions that we have done are listed in the first column. The second column is just research that we found for effective remote learning. And the last column, again, it's just sundries, such so-called. So just information either about brain-based strategies, either about remote learning, or the combination of the two. So we, again, appreciate you all for being here. And if you would take a 1-minute survey and click on the survey in the link, and it helps inform Niswonger and the Rural Life Foundation about what professional development and learning series are interesting to you, what we could do to change and improve, what we could incorporate next time, and so on. Again, I'm Tracy, and Candace was my co-host, and we appreciate you guys being here with us. We know it's been a long day for you already, and we want to honor your time. So have an awesome night, and thank you so much.
In the scene. Yeah, right on the money.